Okay.
And welcome to a forum tonight by the Human Rights Commission. The forum this evening is Homeland Security and the U.S. Patriot Act, Balancing Civil Rights with the Safety of Our Citizens. Just for the members of the Commission, once the forum is over, we're going to take a 5-minute break to let the people participating in the forum leave, and then we have a business meeting after the forum. So we'll start this evening with the flag salute. Commissioner Bowens, will you lead us in that, please?
Please stand. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Commissioner Carteret, will you please read our mission statement?
The mission of the Human Rights Commission of Palm Springs is to promote improved human relations, civic peace, intergroup understanding, and the full acceptance, respect, and participation of all persons in all aspects of community life so that we will be equal in the eyes of each other.
Thank you. Lee, can we have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Janis? Here. Commissioner Boyd? Here. Commissioner Yo?
Here.
Commissioner Bowens?
Here.
Commissioner Feingold?
Here.
Commissioner Zelnis?
Here.
Commissioner Carteret?
Here.
Commissioner Aguano?
Here.
And Commissioner McCullough.
Present.
Thank you. Lee, has the agenda been posted?
The agenda was posted according to the Brown Act on Friday, February 22nd.
Thank you very much. And now I will turn the forum over to Commissioner Aguano.
Thank you, Commissioner Feingold. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this evening's forum entitled Homeland Security and the USA Patriot Act, Balancing Civil Rights with the Safety of Our Citizens. On October 26, 2001, President Bush signed into law the USA Patriot Act. The title of this law is actually an acronym that stands for Uniting and Strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism. The main operative concept of this law is the creation of a new crime now known as domestic terrorism. The Bill of Rights Defense Committee has enumerated objections to the current spate of Homeland Security laws and Justice Department directives. The Defense Committee has concluded that the Patriot Act gives the FBI and the CIA greater rights to wiretap phones, monitor email, survey medical, financial, and student records, and break into homes and offices without prior notification. It also permits deportation and indefinite detainment of non-citizens without the right to judicial appeal. Other laws and orders under the umbrella of Homeland Security permit federal agents to abridge the attorney-client privilege by eavesdropping on conversations between lawyers and their clients who are held in federal custody. It also permits the dismantling of regulations enacted following abuses related to the civil rights and anti-war movements during the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And it permits secret military tribunals for suspected terrorists. All of these perceived threats to the Constitution are magnified in the eyes of the Bill of Rights Defense Committee by the government's refusal to provide unclassified information on how it is using the new laws and regulations under the Freedom of Information Act. It is the intent of this evening's forum to discuss all of these points. Now, with us this evening is quite a distinguished panel, but before I do the introductions, I would like to point out the difficulty that the Forum Committee had in finding a panel that represents a variety of opinions. As always, these forums try to present a balanced and educational dialogue. While we have participants tonight who will argue, I am sure, the need for extraordinary measures during extraordinary times, finding defenders of federal legislation that passed by a majority vote proved to be a daunting task. The Forum Committee has received regrets or no response from quite a few elected representatives, including Orange County Congressman and Chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security, Christopher Cox, as well as from the offices of the FBI, Transportation Security Administration, and the Marines at 29 Palms. Now, the government agencies were invited not to debate policy, but to provide an informed description of the threats to the American people. No one elected to or employed by the government who was contacted was willing to do so. So this legislation does appear to be a political hot potato. I have over here a downloaded copy of the Patriot Act, and you can see it's quite a large document. Anything this large enacted into law as fast as it was is bound to have flaws, most of which I'm sure our panelists will point out to us tonight. However, it is also the intent of this evening's discussion to focus on the philosophy driving this legislation, and that is instituting extreme measures during extreme times. How far can a free and democratic society go in protecting its citizens before the assurance of safety destroys the foundations upon which that society is built? With us this evening to examine these questions are Marshall Gilbert, Palm Springs' very own TV and radio talk show host, political commentator, and raconteur. By the way, Marshall is back on the radio airwaves. He has the coveted drive time hours, Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 a.m. on 1270 a.m. Next to Marshall is Penny Usherwood. Penny is the Associate Professor of History at the College of the Desert. Ms. Usherwood is a Middle East specialist whose area of expertise is the Arab world and Israel. She has spent considerable time in Israel and in Arab countries, especially Jordan, Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon. She was a newscaster for CNN from 1989 to 1994 and was in Jordan when Saddam Hussein entered Kuwait. Professor Usherwood is the moderator of the very successful Great Decisions seminar sponsored by the World Affairs Council, the Foreign Policy Association, and the College of the Desert. Next is Myra McPherson. Myra is an author and journalist currently working on her fourth book, which focuses on dissent in American journalism and the life and times of I.F. Stone, the last century's most independent American journalist. Her newly revised bestseller, Long Time Passing, Vietnam and the Haunted Generation, was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize and was a finalist in the Los Angeles Times Book Awards. This and her other published works have earned praises from author Joseph Heller, former First Lady Rosalind Carter, Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel, and the New York Times. During the many years she was associated with the Washington Post, she specialized in politics and social issues. Time magazine and The New Yorker have recognized her as one of the best of the Washington writers. A frequent lecturer, Myra has appeared on national television programs such as Nightline, The Today Show, and CNN. She has been a fellow at Rutgers University Institute for Policy Studies, was awarded a Fulbright Scholarship to Japan, and was a Rockefeller Center Scholar at Bellagio, Italy. Next is Senator Jack Gordon. Senator Gordon's political and civic service career dates back to over 40 years, and he has earned recognition and accolades at both the state and national level. He was elected to 6 terms in the Florida Senate and served as President pro tempore from 1982 to 1984 and Senate Majority Leader from 1988 to 1990. His diverse and numerous accomplishments have positively impacted healthcare, education, civil rights, and nearly every other social issue this country has faced in the past 4 decades. As a Florida State Senator, he sponsored constitutional amendments ensuring the right to privacy, sponsored an initiative for bilingual education in 1973, and introduced the Equal Rights Amendment in 1979 and the Civil Rights Act of 1992, an anti-discrimination law targeting country clubs. He is an acknowledged expert providing leadership in state and national education and health policy. He and his wife, Myra McPherson, are also local celebrities, having together hosted a Palm Springs radio show called Been There, Done That. And finally, Alan Reitman is the Associate Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union and has served in various leadership roles in that organization on the national level since 1949. He created the 430-page ACLU policy guide and supervised revisions. He has organized national conventions on such diverse topics as corporal punishment in public schools, free speech, public education and religious liberty, and censorship. He has acted as an educational consultant to companies such as Macmillan Publishing and the New York Times. Mr. Reitman has been a professor at Rutgers University since 1988, teaching courses such as law and public policy, and he has taught at Cooper Union and at my alma mater, New York University. He has held the position of board member on numerous boards, including the National Alliance for Safer Cities. Mr. Reitman has also authored 5 books, including The Price of Liberty. Now, ladies and gentlemen, without just yet getting into the details of the Patriot Act, let's start with a big theoretical question. Ben Franklin famously wrote, "If you give up freedom for security, you end up with neither." The question is, are security and freedom mutually exclusive, or can we have both? Where does a democratic society draw the theoretical line? Feel free to jump in at any time. It's an open mic forum.
Joe, I think the answer to your question is that we can have both safety, security, and preserve our civil liberties and privacy. I think it's important to take a brief look at American history to understand the nature of that comment in question. Whenever America has been threatened, or thought it was threatened, indeed at war, we have always sought to curb the rights of individuals. In 1798, the Alien Sedition Acts were passed because of our fear that France was fomenting a revolution here, and criticism of public officials was criminally punished. Indeed, a Republican congressman who wrote a letter to the editor criticizing that law was put in jail. In World War I, immediately after World War I, when there was a great deal of industrial strife in this country, including some bombings in the cities, the Attorney General at that time, Mitchell Palmer, rounded up 6,000 aliens, brought them to New York City, put hundreds of them on boats, and sent them back to Eastern Europe without any hearing, without any due process, without any understanding of the nature of what they were about. And certainly in World War II, when we were concerned about the loyalty of people in this country because of the attacks on Pearl Harbor, we put 120,000 Japanese Americans in relocation camps. Now, in all these events, it was understood afterwards that it was a mistake. Thomas Jefferson let the Alien Sedition Acts pass into oblivion 4 years after it was adopted. Certainly, historians have criticized the Palmer raids of the alien immigrants, and the United States Congress recognized how wrong it was for the relocation of Japanese Americans by a few decades ago, awarding each of the members in the camps or their heirs $20,000 as reparations. The reason for recognizing mistake was to understand that abuses of power can result, and that's part of our natural history. I think it's also important to understand, in terms of our current situation, the war against terror, that we're not dealing here with a war of a few years' duration, but of a war which has an indeterminate length, and therefore our concern about maintaining our rights in the face of security threats is real. To understand our present situation, we also must understand what's at stake in our national desire for security. The President, rightfully so, has said that we are engaged in a campaign to preserve freedom in our country, and that's certainly correct. But we need to define what the word freedom means. It's not only deal with an economic system or social institutions, but it deals with specific areas of freedom which are embedded in our Constitution, put there in our early days because people were denied certain rights through historical experience. And therefore, in that Constitution are certain specific rights as freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of religion, due process of law, which includes a fair trial, right to counsel, and no illegal searches and seizures. And these are the elements of our freedom that must be preserved as we continue our campaign to be safe. Let me summarize again by saying that I think we can have both freedom and we can have both security, but we have to be very aware about the abuse of power in preserving these rights.
I just wanted to make a comment on the oh, I've got to do this. Your comment on the Palmer raids. I know you remember who was the assistant to him. J. Edgar Hoover was a very young man at the time of the Palmer raids in 1919, and he went on to have the largest amount of power that we have ever seen in one person in the United States. And I think that we have to be always aware of the abuse of power, because his abuse of power was beyond anything that anybody knew for years until after his death. And I think we're in a danger now when you say, can we have both, in the sense that people are scared, and they have had a reason to be scared in a way that we haven't before been with the terrorist attacks. But that can be used, that kind of fear can be used in so many wrong ways to say that we have to put these brakes on here and these brakes on there. And the fact that this bill, it's 372 pages, that document you just did. And as I read about it, I understand that it wasn't even ready for preview before they voted, so that no one had a chance to really look at all of these things. But these are really appalling measures. The fact that it's Big Brother Orwellian all over again, when you can have someone open your mail, read your email, eavesdrop on phone conversations, all without a warrant and without having to answer to anyone. You can enter your house, conduct a search, and not tell the person. I want to get back to some of the librarian and authors and writers' points of view on this later. I don't want to take up the time now. But what is really crucial and critical is that more people are more aware of the flaws in this Patriot Act. And it's rather heartwarming to see that in some states, or actually cities here in California, people are having resolutions. They're sending out resolutions that they want the Patriot Act to be amended.
Well, I'd like to add that I think security is always a balancing act. And I think we have the resources in this country to protect ourselves, but it comes down to how much are we willing to give up in order to be safe. I think that all of the protection and all of the rights that the Constitution guarantees to Americans is in jeopardy because of these terrorist threats. There are approximately 133 Muslim organizations in the United States, not all of them legal. I think the people who wish harm to us will use our very system to destroy us. I think we're in a new kind of war now. It's new for us, certainly, but new for many people with respect. First of all, we're not fighting a geographic enemy. People are very hard to identify. It's a conservative estimate that there are perhaps, I've heard people at RAND, Brookings, people connected with intelligence in the United States estimate that there are approximately 4,000 cells operating in the United States, perhaps have been here since the late 1970s, 1980s. These people know our system very well. Cases in point are Lackawanna, New York, Syracuse, New York yesterday. There was a Saudi student arrested in Idaho, I believe, yesterday as well, belonging to an organization overseas that wishes harm, direct harm to the United States. There's an organization in Chicago, the North American Muslim Trust, which funnels millions and millions of dollars every month. My feeling is that we have such a serious enemy, and an enemy that really doesn't want to take over our system and be us. They want to destroy our way of life. It's almost like we're in a war of politics. We're in an intellectual political war between the politics of reason and the politics of fanaticism. And I think we're feeling our way along as we go. I'm very reluctant and hesitant to say that I approve of much in the Patriot Act. I'm afraid of it, but I think I'm more afraid of the terrorists.
Well, one of the things that questions that I keep having is, how are we measuring this terrorist threat? We had the bombing of the center, 7 or 8 years ago, when they blew up that truck in the basement of the Twin Towers, and then 5 years later they destroyed them. We have not seen very much in the way of other terrorist attacks since then or in that interim? And how does one justify the actions being taken without any real understanding of what the threat is? And we call it a war because that really doesn't describe the situation, but if you were trying to destroy the mafia, which I suppose is a reasonable analogy, you wouldn't send troops to Afghanistan. You would do something with policemen, and you'd go after people that you knew were involved. And it seems to me that a lot of what's happening is that we've developed a great fear psychosis in the country around what was obviously a very tragic kind of action. But I find it hard to fit the responses to what might be the problem. Here we have the 400-page Patriot Act, and I would just ask a question under the Patriot Act, whether if you went to the library and asked for a copy, would your name go on a list? Would somebody come and ask you, how come you want to read the bill that gives them the authority to ask the librarian? And if she tells me that the FBI or whoever it is came around and asked who took out the book, and if she refuses, she can go to jail, or he can go to jail. Well, that's how far do you have to go to deal with a problem that we perceive, but we haven't really been able to put any kind of limitation on? And that's, the criminal code is based on people doing things, not thinking things. Now, that's very basic to our constitutional rights. So the fact that somebody as you point out, somebody in Chicago belonged to a group or gave some money to a group which we know now gave money to terrorists, but which he may or may not have known at the time, provides real problems in making distinctions about what's safe and what isn't.
If I'd like, may I just go ahead? I'm just just to add to that, I think it's important that what you hear is not always the truth. Now, the Government Accounting Office, GAO, just this week disclosed that last year Ashcroft and the Department of Justice had highly inflated the number of terrorist actions in their criminal caseload by 75%. 75% did not fit the legal definition of federal crimes of terrorism. And that began last summer when the Justice Department ordered all U.S. attorneys to reclassify hundreds of routine cases as terrorism-related legal prosecutions. And prosecutors could waive away legal definitions of federal crimes of terrorism adopted by Congress. So what happened is that they were cooking the books and hyping the numbers. And that's always fodder for the 24-hour-a-day cable television news. One article broke this story, and the GAO spent a whole year and finally came up with all of this. And meanwhile, while they were reviewing the fact that these were not the accurate statements, finally the Justice Department said that they had misclassified at least half of the cases. So when we hear these enormous numbers of fear and this and that, and how many cells there are here and there, and how much they're doing with the terrorism in America, we have to really, really examine where the figures are coming from. And even as this GAO report came out, Attorney General Ashcroft was actually wanting to expand the powers of the U.S. Patriot Act. And I can understand you're saying your fear of the terrorists, but I lived in Washington and was there through the whole Pentagon thing, and we live across the street from the mosque, and there's a group of about 25 men who every Friday use a bullhorn and say all kinds of outrageous things against us. In fact, they were considered so violent that they were kicked out of the mosque, and the mosque people would have nothing to do with them. I don't like that. I mean, I really think, wow, you know, particularly after we saw the Pentagon smokes billowing from our room and everything else, I said, I really don't like the fact that these people can say all these things, and maybe they're inciting terrorists. But we also live in America, and that's free speech, and I think you have to balance this fear situation. My son was on the Hill and was working next door to Daschle's office, and when the anthrax thing came, and everybody was terrorized until they found out that it wasn't as bad as they thought it was. So I'm just cautioning people to look at, as Jack said, individual human rights, and whether if you go into a library, they can put you in a corner and say that we don't like the fact that you're reading these books on Islam right now. And why are you reading these books on Islam?
Marshall's had his finger on the button for a long time. Go ahead, Marshall.
Guys, so much to respond to. I'm not thrilled with every aspect of the Patriot Act. We've made mistakes in the past. We'll make them in the future. It was said that we're facing an enemy like no other. We are. They do want to destroy us. It's no country in particular. And they have no regard for civilian life. They just kill and maim. And I want to respond to some of the things that were said tonight. Number one, one of the gentlemen brought up that the mafia, they couldn't get them. So what did they do? They came up with RICO and basically drew up their own legislation, which should be, to some people, as offensive as they find the Patriot Act. I mean, they just came up with a new law to get people that they couldn't get for decades. The senator brought up the fact that there's only been a couple of attacks. That's true. It is widely believed that the anthrax is more of domestic terrorism. However, these laws don't apply to Jack of Palm Springs who's ripping off a car. These are for terrorists and suspected terrorists. And we're in a new world. And although there's only been a couple attacks, we've thwarted many, stopped many of them. And so the two, yeah, but only because we've been on our toes. And, you know, we don't even want to mention the fact that the embassies that have been bombed, the coal that was bombed, the brain towers in Saudi Arabia that was bombed, and now we're finding out that a lot of that money was funneled right here from the USA to these terrorist groups. It's great to have freedom, but if your country doesn't exist anymore, what are you going to defend freedom on? And again, I'll wrap up with this. I'm not thrilled with every aspect of this, but we had to come up with something not dissimilar to RICO because we didn't have anything like that ever before. And we got to stop these guys because if we relent, if we give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And this is our survival at stake. This is not a debating club. And our survival, our children, grandchildren, I don't have any grandchildren yet, but better not. And, but, you know, and I don't mean to put down anybody. I'm just, you know, it's a forum and we need to discuss these things. But we live in a different world like nobody in the world has ever seen. Other democratic countries have enacted similar laws like these, and they're surviving.
I see people are itching to jump in. I'd like to focus the discussion a little bit. I'm sure you'll have plenty of opportunities to get your points across, but I do want to focus the questions a little. Doing the research for this forum, it struck me as the biggest issue we have in disagreement usually revolves around semantics. So I think I'd like to clarify some terminology and see how people respond to specific questions. The second question I would like to ask deals with detainees, quote unquote. What is a detainee? In 2002, the American Bar Association Terrorism Task Force issued a report that said about detainees. There may be circumstances in which providing a detainee with access to counsel would be unwise due to the geographical location and the state of hostilities. However, the report added, citizens and other persons lawfully present in the United States, detained within the United States, far from the battlefield, should not fall within that category. Now, my first question about this particular topic deals with what is the definition of a detainee. But what I find strange about that quote from that report is that last line, far from the battlefield, seems a bit disingenuous. This point has been brought up several times tonight already, that traditional democratic safeguards as found in the Bill of Rights can and have more or less functioned when our nation was at war with traditional enemies. And it was pointed out that those traditional enemies were nation states. But until now, we have never had enemies not of nation states with borders and national identities. Now our sworn enemies are political interest groups where the purpose of war is not conquest but coercion. Are we not literally at war with an enemy that does not wear a uniform and whose primary targets are not military installations but innocent American civilians? And because of that, don't we need different rules to combat this enemy on our own soil?
Well, I think that American Bar Association report was referring to that person who fought with the Taliban, and they kept him from having counsel. Anybody they pick up overseas and dump in Guantanamo, regardless of their citizenship, would fit that category. Whereas somebody arrested in the United States, from what you just read, would be entitled to counsel, and that's that they believe that person should be entitled to counsel. They said anybody legally here, which would include legal immigrants, many of whom have been swept up in all kinds of ways and put in jail and held without counsel. So that's one kind of distinction. It's that the one who had the explosives in his shoes and was going to blow up this Pan American plane or whatever the airline was a British citizen, and I guess they grabbed him for immediately and tried him. I guess they tried him here. But when you talk about other countries having this same situation, they've had terrorist attacks in England for a long time. The whole Algerian episode in France caused an enormous amount of bombings and blow up and this, that, and the other of terrorist attacks, and that's been true in a lot of places. And it would, I don't know the answer. It would be very interesting to look at how did the British and the French and anybody else who's been in the Italians who've had that kind of situation, how have they dealt with it, and are they doing any better or worse job of protecting the liberties of their citizens under the best we could say are comparable circumstances? And I recognize that you'd have different ways of talking about comparable circumstances.
The fact that the threat is so great, and therefore we need to adopt new rules, seems to indicate to me that somehow our law enforcement operation is not successful. I'm not comparing this to the arrest of a common garden variety criminal, but I've been impressed by reports in this country and abroad how good, steady police work, meaning having informants inside of organizations, operating from tips that people called in, resulted in the arrest of people who were actually out to hurt us. So the fact that we seem to need, quote, new rules, and unless you discuss the specifics of those new rules, such as the right to counsel, for example, I don't think it's adequate to simply say that because the threat is so great, we should forego the usual protections that people have under our system. And as I say, this doesn't mean that the threat should not be followed by more police work and new techniques. I have no objection to searching baggage in airlines to see if there are bombs or any other elements there. But to talk about the right to counsel, as I heard, should not be given to people who are detained or held incommunicado, whose families do not know where they are, and the public has no information about it, seems to me to be a gross violation of a basic due process right. And regardless of the threat, I think that we have to stick by those rights which are in the Constitution. I could quote to you a statement by Richard Clarke, who was the person in the Clinton White House dealing with terror, and in the Bush White House dealing with terror from cyberspace, who said there's no reason in his 11 years of work to indicate that we have to sacrifice privacy and civil liberties because of the threat. And that if we do so, we are becoming the same as the people we are trying to oppose.
Well, I think it's also useful to remember that if we're talking about right to counsel, that means they already got the guy in the can. I mean, he's already in jail. That's a question of whether he's going to get representation in court. So he's not a danger because he's already incarcerated. And it seems to me under those circumstances, all you have are prosecutors and police who like to have convictions. And I've dealt with them for a long, long time, and that's their way of looking at the world, and that's the way they get elected and all that sort of thing. So that once you've got them in jail, having the legality of the arrest and the legal procedure verified by their having counsel seems to me to be something that there's no reason to jeopardize.
You know, I want to respond to the senator again. I know many prosecutors, and you're right, they do keep tabs on their win-loss record, and they want wins. However, I don't know one prosecutor that would attempt to put an innocent person in jail. We live in such a strange time. We live in a time where we get all woozy and get the willies about arresting an illegal immigrant. And that's the world we live in now. And we also have to break these people up who they are. Are they illegal immigrants? Are they legal immigrants? Are they enemy combatants? Or are they citizens? I want to again say this Patriot Act applies to terrorists and suspected terrorists. And we found out with the John Gotti case that the lawyer was actually a conduit for Mr. Gotti to do illegal things. Now with a racketeer and a mob guy, that's bad, but with a guy who has the code for a nuclear bomb in Detroit, that's devastating. And we just have to look at this. Our intelligence community knows a lot more than we know. And again, I come from a family of lawyers. The thought of not getting counsel offends me in the extreme. However, a nuclear bomb going off in Detroit offends me more. And like everybody said tonight, these people have no rules, they have no regard for any life, and they hate us. And they hate us more than they love themselves.
If I may say something. You know, you have used they continuously, and you've said that the Patriotism Act is only for terrorists. We've just quoted various sections of it in which, I mean, they have the American Publishers Association, librarians, people all over are denying that this is a good law because all it does, I mean, it's the days of the McCarthy hearing. You know, how can you defend the concept, as this one editor said, I am appalled by the section of the Patriot Act that allows the government to review bookstore purchases and library records of individuals. Your concept seems to be that if anybody gets looked at, they have to be guilty, or they have to have a reason for them to have looked at them in the first place. Well, I beg to disagree heartily, because that is not the way this is being perpetrated at all. You could be subjected to somebody who said that, you know, you're reading this book on that book, and then you would be under surveillance. And this business of they and how we've got to get them and all of that is just an emotional concept that allows an awful lot of people to run roughshod over others. And as I said, I had the quotes and the facts on these so-called non-garden variety of suspects who they had totally mislabeled. They labeled somebody a terrorist who got drunk in an airplane. They labeled another person a terrorist because they were mentally ill and were making kind of weird expressions. They've arrested, one of my friends is a Jew who has a beard, and because he looked that he was possibly one of an Islam group, was arrested and searched, and he happens to be the owner of a major bookstore. You really, really have to be careful when you start throwing words like they and them and us around, because I think that's what really creates the kind of toadyism to things that we have to look at and say, no way, because this is America and this is very unconstitutional.
They are terrorists. That's who they are.
I don't know who they are.
Wait, I didn't interrupt. They are terrorists. Them are terrorists. This law applies to suspected, not proven, suspected terrorists and people who refuse to comply with the law.
That's not true. These people are constitutional. These people are being held for months without any information about them. You are really, really reading this wrong.
Okay, let's do a hypothetical then, and assume for a moment that we have captured someone who has been identified. The Geneva Convention makes no provision for wartime spies, and being captured in the enemy's uniform typically resulted in summary execution. In that same report that I quoted before, the ABA also states the Sixth Amendment provision on the right to counsel does not technically apply to, quote, enemy combatants who have not been charged with crimes, but there is no dispute that individuals who have been criminally charged do have a Sixth Amendment right to counsel. So let's frame the question in terms of an identified terrorist, an identified enemy combatant, an identified prisoner of war. Prisoner of wars have always been incarcerated for indeterminate lengths of times without access to lawyers. Should al-Qaeda terrorists be treated differently than German or Japanese prisoners of war were treated? Should every prisoner of war that we captured during World War II have been provided a lawyer?
That's not what we're talking about. The prisoners of war are under the Geneva Convention, and they're held in a place, and when the war is over, they're exchanged, and they're interrogated, and if they give some information or if they don't. I will digress with when I was a combat infantryman in World War II in Leyte, and we were in that invasion. We captured Japanese, which is quite unusual, but we had an interpreter, Japanese interpreter with us, a native Hawaiian, and he started to question this guy who had his leg shot, so he was lying on the ground. And the next thing we knew, our interpreter was jumping on him and pounding the hell out of him. And what's going on? Well, he accused me of being a disloyal Japanese. And he said, I'm not a Japanese, I'm an American, and we had to pull him off so he wouldn't beat the guy up, so maybe we could get some more information. Prisoners of war are a completely different thing. One of the things that really bothers me is calling this a war, because I come back to my mafia thing. It's more a loose confederation of people who have no respect for any kind of law or of any kind of life, and who have an agenda of what they want to do, but they're not a country, and they don't have an army, and they're not controllable by the normal kind of military action. And as far as the nuclear bomb in Detroit, which I would regret very much as my native city, I remember the Harvard physics student who drew the plan for the bomb from the information he knew from physics and what he got on the internet. So that could happen any place, and probably will at some point or other if they can get a hold of the materials. But to take someone, if you have somebody in custody for whatever reason, and you're trying to deal in a system of law, I don't see how there could be any excuse for not letting them have counsel, period.
Okay. I can understand everybody's eagerness to jump into this. I'm excited myself, and I want to ask questions as well. I would like to ask the panelists to allow everybody an opportunity to speak. And just look to me, and I'll give you a signal. And so I'm going to keep score and see who goes and how many times we speak, okay? And so I want to ask a follow-up. Right. I just want to ask you a follow-up question then. Then what you're saying, it is okay to detain at Guantanamo Bay those combatants for an indefinite period of time and deny them access to law. Is that what I understood you to mean? Yeah.
No, this idea of a combatant is a new term that was sort of made up by Bush when he talked about some of these people that they may or may not have found in Afghanistan. And I don't know that there's any legal basis, any basis in law that has any definition of what that combatant if he's a non-citizen and he's been involved in that, he's still if you want to make the point that this is a country of law that respects freedom, then you're going to give that person the opportunity to be tried and so forth. To me, if you got these guys in Guantanamo, you try them, put them in jail, give them a trial, and let everybody see that they're terrorists who have nothing but the worst kind of animus toward us and would do anything desperately to kill as many people as possible, and that should be shown. You don't have to just sit them on an island, have them climb the trees for coconuts in order to prove a point. That doesn't really make any sense as Americans as to what we're doing in terms of defending our freedom. If we want to defend our freedom, we ought to accord that kind of protection against excessive government and excessive punishment that is afforded in a country that is ruled by law. That's
All right, Marshall
where I
and then
am.
Penny. I see your hands on the buttons.
I'm 99% sure that enemy combatant is in the Military Code of Justice, and President Bush just didn't make it up, but I'm not 100% certain. We have to understand what we're doing. And what we're doing is something we've never done before. Generally, there's an enemy. Generally, it's a country. This is not something we've had to deal with. So is this perfect? No. Is it the best that we have? I think so. They're running the risk of somebody asking me a question and then answering it for me. I want to make this statement that somebody else brought up, that other countries. And I recently went to Israel, and I got profiled. And I was detained. I would imagine in the United States probably wouldn't be legal, for 3 hours, and asked questions. And I'm a Jew. And but my life didn't end. Civilization as I know it didn't cease to exist. Answered their questions. Went to another person who asked me a bunch of questions, and then a third, and I believe a fourth. And so since they've been dealing with this and them for many years, longer than we have, again, they're a Democratic ally. But they have come to the realization if they want to survive, then something other than just saying refer to the current laws as they exist today, they're not going to survive. And that's what we had to do here. Am I troubled that probably 95% of the people who voted for this didn't read it? Sure I am. Who would not be? You know, but what's the alternative? What's the alternative to the Patriot Act? Our destruction. That's the alternative. So yeah, there's a lot of things in the Patriot Act that I don't like. But absent of that, I would like a whole lot less the results.
Penny?
Well, I think definitely many of these measures limiting our civil liberties may be somewhat unnecessary right now. And the Patriot Act certainly troubles me with the points that have been raised. I'm very troubled by those. But these kinds of things will be necessary in the future if a nuclear bomb is set off inside the United States. I believe the threat is real. I believe the United States faces a real and present danger, a clear and present danger. I also believe that Marshall's right. We're in a war of survival. It's a brand new war for us. Americans should be concerned about the abridgment of civil rights or civil liberties. We need to be concerned about what civil liberties or what civil rights are being abridged. And then what is the criteria for this? Who's setting the standards? But this aside, I'm a social historian. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I know the Arab, I speak, read and write Arabic. I know the Arab mind perhaps as well, perhaps as any outsider could know it. I know that in many instances, we are a country governed by politics. We have a U.S. Constitution that's a perfect document. It is a perfect document created by brilliant minds. There's a lot of leeway and flexibility in our document. The United States Constitution doesn't provide for war, but we go to war. There are things in the Constitution that will allow us to stay safe if we are threatened. America's governed by politics. We're dealing with people for the most part, and right now I'm centering on the Middle East, and within the Middle East, the Arab world. We're dealing with people who are ruled by power. It's quite a different thing, quite a different thing. They will use our system against us. If you want to give it a geographic location instead of saying they, I think the most dangerous enemy the United States faces long-term, is Saudi Arabia.
Is what?
Saudi Arabia. I would be shocked if I found out Saudi Arabia were not financing every institution here. I would be shocked. Because they are. They keep at least $1 billion in U.S. bank accounts every single day, perhaps all the way up to $1 trillion. Nobody knows for sure. They're very, very sophisticated. We could arrest Osama bin Laden tomorrow. Wouldn't make a bit of difference. So I think we're in a new kind of war, and I think it's a war of survival, and it's very frightening. If they win, we have nothing to save or promote. If we do the wrong thing, we destroy ourselves. So we have minds, great minds, thinking about this. The people on the panel have serious concerns about this, as I do. But I think the danger is so clear and so present that if we don't act, they will use our very system against us. They've been doing this, perhaps, we had hijackings, skyjackings, kidnapping in the 80s in Lebanon. Now it's gotten into actual bombings. You can pull up Al Jazeera's website on the internet if you like. It's in English now. But you could pull it up in Arabic or do the Arabic, and they've done they're quite open about what they're going to do. They claim they have 6 atomic bombs in the United States in place, 6 major cities. I can get you a copy of that if you like in English. I'd be happy to. No one doubts that this is possible. No, this also doesn't mean they can activate this plan at all. It'd be very hard to activate. It's not as easy to pull this off as many people are being led to believe. And I do think numbers are inflated and people are frightened to get certain things going. But I also think we're facing a new kind of enemy, a devious enemy, an enemy, the Arabs, the Arab world, the Muslim world to a large extent, uses language quite differently than we do. It's quite flamboyant. There's a lot of hyperbole in the Arabic language. If you saw Saddam's interview last night with Dan Rather, Saddam Hussein was speaking to the Arab audience, and he insisted on speaking in Arabic. He was speaking to Arabs, not Americans. He was using Dan Rather. It was quite obvious. No one who has any critical thinking in their background gave that interview much credence. But nevertheless, I think we're fighting an enemy we don't understand. We think they're like us and that they will be reasonable and enter into negotiations with goodwill and good faith. They're counting on the fact that we think that. And when we find out that they're acting in bad faith, it could very well be too late. So we're walking a tightrope, and it's very frightening to me as an American. But again, I'm more frightened of the enemy than I am of losing my rights, because I come from a tradition where at some point, if it becomes unnecessary to have these safeguards, I believe we could put this. We have a system. If we remove it for a while, we can put it back in place. We can get some things back. But I think we're on a very dangerous road.
Alan.
A factual comment and a broader comment. I believe the Constitution includes that Congress has a right to declare war. Secondly, in terms of Mr. Gilbert's visit to Israel, and I was there 2 years ago and went through the same security check. I was let go, as you were let go, after a thorough interrogation and physical investigation. But the people of Guantanamo and other places are being detained with indefinite duration without any nature of a charge being leveled against them or any of the basic idea of counsel, which under our Constitution is an important element. I have a feeling, as I'm listening to the last two comments, that reminds me a little bit about the person who says, a little bit pregnant, but everybody on this panel, in this room, and I imagine in the country, are opposed to what the threat that we face is. We all are concerned about our security and our danger. And to simply say that, yes, I understand there are some things in the Patriot Act which violate civil liberties are bad, but we don't get the specifics of it, I think we need to discuss what's wrong about those elements to really understand the nature of the problem. Under your definition, as I see it, anything that we do would be allowed because the threat is so grave. I don't think you can take, I mean, if you're talking about people of Middle Eastern descent where the focus has been placed in terms of attention, and I'm not talking here about Guantanamo, but people who were detained originally after 9/11, over 1,100 people for over a year without counsel, without even being named. Now about 800 have been released after a year and a half detention with no charges against them. But if you're talking about those types of things, I think you have to ask yourself, what specifics are we willing to give up? And
Okay.
I don't think, as I quoted Mr. Clark, who's been in the Tapa Terra investigation, thinks that you have to give them up. For example, if I can go back for a moment to our original question, Joe, I don't think that our security and safety is safeguarded by a program which the Attorney General initiated, but has since given up because of objections, called TIPS, which would have had postal workers, people who lay your cable lines, utility and gas lines, reporting on anything suspicious they may see or hear which affects terrorism. Very broad definition. That involves citizens in spying on other people. I don't think that necessarily ensures our security. And there are other elements in terms of what has been talked about in what we call the ability to obtain the records of third parties. In other words, not only libraries, but hospitals, doctors' offices, internet providers, bookstores are now in a position where any agent, without a warrant, can go into a bookstore and can ask which book has been taken out and by whom, as part of the investigation of terrorism. I mean, there's no stopping at this point. If you want to talk about people of Middle Eastern descent, you have millions of Muslims in this country. And if we are going to engage in racial profiling as we have, why not put a wiretap on every home that these people are in? Because one of them might be knowledgeable to somebody else who knows somebody else who knows somebody else down the line. In other words, you can carry the emphasis on security to such a point that you are eliminating all of the protections that I think our Constitution provides. And again, if I can quote Mr. Clark, if we do that, we are losing the fight against terrorism because we become what our enemy is.
Okay, you know what, I'd like to focus the discussion on specifics. We are talking about extremes. We're coming across as opposite ends of a continuum here. And I'd rather focus on the center part. I'd like to find out where we can reach consensus. And again, I go back to the term of semantics. I seem to be caught up into this definition of what is what. I'd like to talk about the difference between penal and civil courts and laws and military tribunals. Military tribunals, under well-defined circumstances, have always been legitimate in our history, dating back to the Revolutionary War. And if I'm not mistaken, Mary Surratt was accused and convicted and executed for participating in Lincoln's assassination, and she was convicted under a military tribunal. So, people are objecting to the use of military tribunals as opposed to civil and penal justice system. When is a military tribunal appropriate? With the understanding, and I know we're not all lawyers here, with the understanding that a military tribunal has a greater range of freedom to operate and less constitutional safeguards. So when is that appropriate?
I think it would probably be most appropriate with people who are, let me say this so I don't offend anybody, people who are non-citizens who have come here for the specific purpose of engaging in war. There's a good reason for a military tribunal, or terrorism, or war. It's tricky. It's tricky. You're talking about treason. You're talking about military trials, and boy, their rights are really curtailed there. But these are tough calls because there's been so few of them. We're kind of learning as we go. And I want to respond real quick. No, it's not the appropriate way to do that. But to answer the question, I think military tribunals, should be for people who come here specifically from another country to engage in war against us. I think that would be the perfect use for a military tribunal.
Ladies and gentlemen, do you agree? Disagree?
The military tribunal is used in times of war or to discipline our own forces in times of war or peace. There'll be a military tribunal that may try the commandant of the Air Force Academy, for example. Let's give something out of the papers today. But I just want to say to Marshall that the enemy combatant, you're correct, that is in the military code, but applying enemy combatant to an American citizen, which is what happened with the guy who was fighting with the Taliban, was a totally new concept. Never considered that a citizen of the country could then be considered an enemy, and it was by fiat, and he was dealt with in that fashion. And I don't know whether he ever got counsel.
Well, wasn't there a precedent during the Civil War when citizens fought citizens?
I don't know, but Civil War would be pretty hard to distinguish.
I do want to say one thing about when you were mentioning Mary Surratt and the military tribunal. For decades, for over a century, judges and lawyers have argued that was not a legal, that this was a citizen, and therefore she could not be tried, should not have been tried under military tribunal at all. But again, it was at a heightened time in America after the death of Lincoln, so people she was railroaded, in other words. But that would not be a legal use of the military tribunal, So I think you have those situations where I don't think anybody, has any answers, and I think that it would be foolish for us to try to have them. But I don't think it has to be either or with the Patriot Act. I think that the civil liberties that have been so terribly threatened, I think there can be changes in that. I think that we probably do have to step up activities about terrorists, but the real problem is how do you go about doing it, and to have this unbelievable sweep that can pick up anything along the way is I think, we just can't accept that, that's all. I just don't think it's acceptable.
Not being an attorney, I can't speak to the military tribunals other than it does cut down on the grandstanding. You don't have access to the press. And in some ways, perhaps the trials are more legal and there's less flamboyant hoopla around them. But that's something definitely that would have to be watched. I don't know, with all this talk about losing some of our privacy and having the government snoop on us, this is really not new. I mean, we carry all kinds of ID, and we're always being asked to show them. We have our driver's license, our Social Security cards. There are cameras on the roads, on the highways, in the airports, in hotels, in dressing rooms of women's stores. Our Medicare cards, our credit cards, we'll send back at the end of the year a breakdown of what we've spent and where we've spent it. I think there's already a lot known about us, and certainly some of this, I think officials already have a great deal of information about Americans, any American. In fact, I think we have so much information. I think the problem in this country is we don't have enough people to sift through the information. We have the intelligence, we don't have the people to go through it. And I don't want to specifically target people of Middle Eastern descent. And the way I've worded it sounds like that's what I'm doing, because that's what I'm doing. But I don't know, but what this is a particular group of people. They're guilty by association, some of them. Certainly they're innocent. But this is a group that has come out and said they want to destroy us, not work with us, not compromise, but destroy us. And the Muslim organizations, many of them are not legal. They're very sophisticated, and they will have to be watched very carefully because they're very wealthy and they're very sophisticated. Whenever I go to Egypt, any time I've ever been in Egypt, I've had to report to the police station within 24 hours. I just do it. I go and I stand in line and I check in. You check in at the airport and then you show up at the police station. It's just sort of routine. We don't keep good track of who comes into this country. I've taught at universities, and then I came here to the College of the Desert. We don't know when we issue a student visa to come here and study, and I've only been here 3 years, so I'm not terribly familiar with California. But I know when students come into the United States and certainly say they're going to come to, if they receive a visa overseas and come to California to go to College of the Desert, there is no tracking mechanism. So once they enter the country, we have no idea where they go. We have wide open borders between Mexico and the United States, and certainly up and around upstate New York and the Canadian border with the United States. We get, last time I checked, and it was the CIA handbook, 1 million people enter the United States every single day. Some come to work, some come for the day, some come to shop, some come for business, but around 1 million people come into the United States every single day. So we have tremendous security problems in this country, and if you find a group of people who are up to no good, who say they are not up to, who say they're up to no good, they're not secret about this, it's nothing secretive, then I think perhaps they're worth looking at. But again, we have to be careful not to damage our soul. I'm more worried about that perhaps and concerned about that than you think I am. But I think it goes right back to a clear and present danger faces the United States, and it's a brand new kind of enemy, and they realize we know nothing about them, and they are very sophisticated.
Okay, Alan, one more comment on this topic, and then I'd like to steer this ocean liner in a different direction.
Brief semantical comment. My reference to people of Middle Eastern descent was picked up, and unless I heard incorrectly, I heard the reference they. As far as I know, there are millions of people in this country of Middle Eastern descent who are practicing Muslims who are not in the terrorist category at all. And I think that has to be kept in mind.
And there are many people here from Middle Eastern descent who are Jewish or Christians. Many, many Christians live in the Middle East and come here. Certainly many Lebanese.
But, but I think we have to be careful in our delineation of a group that we don't engage in guilt by association.
I agree.
Okay.
And there was a New York Times article about, yesterday about all the people of Middle Eastern descent who are fleeing to Canada because they find all of this this kind of new repression is harming their way of life, and they had interviews with people who were, it seemed, completely innocent, families, children. So I just really wanted to reiterate that I agree with Alan on this, that any kind of profiling like that can pick up an awful lot of people in a full sweep that would be totally innocent.
Okay.
But perhaps our very system, because it's an honorable system, would then free those that we have no business holding.
Well, if they did indeed have, but we have been acting in violation of constitutional protection. So I think you're right. If we didn't do that, if we, as Jack said, if we went ahead and had due process, had a legal situation with these people rather than just detaining them, I think that you're right. And the ones that are not guilty, many of whom have now been let go, should have probably been let go earlier. So,
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about those innocent Americans, us, as we sit around in our homes in Palm Springs and Palm Desert and frequent bookstores. Again, doing the research on this, I came across this topic several times, and I sort of had an intellectual disconnect here, and I want the civil libertarians to help me out in understanding what this means. Civil libertarians have recently written of their fears that the term domestic terrorism might be applied to acts of civil disobedience. Okay. Now, Thoreau posited that acts of civil disobedience are profound acts of conscience and moral conviction because the protester assumes the responsibility of his actions and because civil disobedience, by definition, is an illegal act punishable under law. Now, you think of Gandhi, Mandela, King. How is civil disobedience different after the Patriot Act than it was before?
As far as I know, and I can't answer your question, the issue is not civil disobedience under the Patriot Act. I don't know of people who have sat down in bridges and tunnels as a way of protesting the war. They've marched, they've passed out literature, they've met in meetings. That's where the emphasis of activity is in, not on civil disobedience. And when I hear that the Attorney General has authorized the FBI to go into mosques and to go into public meetings and political gatherings to monitor an intelligence investigation, to hear what people are talking about in terms of their political, religious views, that's what concerns me in terms of the scope of the Patriot Act. I'm not saying that because you have civil disobedience, you should not be punished by law. That has been the situation, and certainly it's a moral demonstration of one's beliefs and convictions. But that's not where the emphasis is today.
Anybody else want to comment on civil disobedience? Again, it's in the literature of civil libertarians when they write about a fear. Take the situation, the scenario you just described, protesters sitting down in the tunnel, blocking traffic, disruption. Okay, they're guilty of a crime. There's no question about that. Their fear is that now they are labeled domestic terrorists. Is that realistic?
Yes, and it is. And if the law is abused, as many are, that could very well happen. You have somebody who firmly believes that jailing people without counsel or a charge against them, and they do some civil disobedience in regards to that, I think there's a legitimate fear that they might have some retaliation by the government and maybe even be labeled a domestic terrorist. That's not unheard of in the past. That specific is, but stretches by the government who want to label somebody some way, they can do that very easily.
Okay, let's get back to the theoretical line between freedom and safety. And I think Myra's going to be interested in this question because it has to do with librarians and bookstores. I remember a book written by Abby Hoffman in the late 60s or early 70s, and the book was entitled Steal This Book. And very vivid images. A large-sized book, a black cover with large words, steal this book. And Abby's intent, of course, was all the hippies would go in and rip off the bookstore. Now, I will not admit to actually having stolen the book. I will admit to, however, standing in Bookmasters on 34th Street for several hours and reading it from cover to cover and then returning it to the shelf. Now, I guess you can accuse me of intellectual theft if you want to be so kind to that book. Some of you may recall it was about guerrilla theater tactics, and it contained many suggestions on how to, and I quote, screw the government and the capitalist pigs, end quote. Now, Hoffman's status as a celebrity anarchist / subversive helped create a public censorship cause célèbre. I bring up this point because I would like the panelists to comment on people's fears about the government knowing about what they are reading and then using that information against this. Isn't the real issue privacy versus censorship? If there was more censorship of such readily available documents as how to make a nuclear bomb in 10 easy steps, or even how to make a Molotov cocktail, wouldn't there be less need to know who is reading such material?
I want to answer this first because I think it really applies to me. The Supreme Court has spoken to this on the Turner Diaries and what people can write and can't write. But as a talk show host, I'm very likely to walk in to, if I'm going to debate somebody on the radio about terrorism, go and check out a book called, How to Be a Good Terrorist. So does that particular aspect of the Patriot Act bother me? You bet. But I would like to think if I checked out a bunch of books regarding terrorism for honest debate on the radio, that somebody from the FBI would come in, sit down and talk to me and tell them why I'm doing and what I'm doing. Now, in ordinary times, I shouldn't have to do that. I should not have to tell anybody why I choose the books to read that I do read. And if I could read, that would be much better. But if this is going to be a victorious, and some people aren't comfortable with war, so you can call it whatever you want, but it is a war, we're going to have to sort through this. This is not set in stone, as was said earlier. They didn't like tips, they got rid of it. This Patriot Act was passed overwhelmingly by an evenly split Congress and Senate. Liberals, conservatives, independents, and they can overwhelmingly modify it or get rid of it. And they have not chosen to do that. They'll get rid of certain aspects, and I think the very first to go, right after TIPS, will be this library deal. So the fact that this is engraved in stone and we're stuck with it forever, it's not the case. I hope there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But I don't believe that we should have to give up some of our rights. The senator and the man from the ACLU said, people are detained without being guilty of any crime. Happens every day in America. And I understand the difference, without being accused of a crime or having counsel, but I don't think it's much of a difference to people sit in jail for a year or two awaiting trial, specifically lower income people or people of color, or maybe if Robert Blake were innocent, he's going to sit in jail a couple of years and he may be innocent. Maybe he's not, I don't really care. But the point is, this happens every day. People are put in jail, committed no crime, and I understand the difference and I understand the legality. But I just don't think the person who sat in jail for 2 years understands the difference. And so, and somebody brought up medical privilege. That's a myth. Didn't exist prior to the Patriot Act, and it doesn't exist today. There is no such thing as medical privilege. Yeah, it's in the books. It just doesn't exist.
Well, let me say that if that's the way you feel about the library thing that we've been talking about, would you agree to say a recommendation of our group to the Palm Springs Public Library is to destroy the records of anybody who's taken out any books, so that if they came to ask who took out the book that you wanted to take out on terrorism, that no FBI guy could come and ask you about it because there'd be no record. That's what the Richmond, California City Council instructed their library, and apparently it's happened in other California places. But we could move the conversation into what kind of reaction ought the community have, and that might be a very good one. And we could tell Borders not to keep the credit slips and stuff like that. That would probably screw up their accounting. But the library is something that people control.
I just, well, in fact, yes, unless they have specifically charged you with something, as an owner of a bookstore, you can just simply do away with all of your files. And in fact, a couple of the bookstores in Vermont have just started to do this because they disagree with the idea that anybody can oversee and look at what anybody has purchased. I'm just more concerned that there are not enough people who read, frankly, for any reason. But you mentioned getting rid of the tip program, but Senator John Edwards, who is running for the presidency and as a Democrat, he just introduced a few days ago a bill that would give $10 million to Attorney General Ashcroft to form neighborhood watch terrorist teams. And one of the senior officials with the American Library Association, who has been increasingly outspoken on the whole business of the library, said that this is taking a very legitimate neighborly endeavor, which was Crime Watch, which we're all aware of, and has turned it into a completely un-American sort of thing, looking out for your neighbor and turning it into Red China, where your neighbors are reporting on who you're meeting with. And I keep going back to the degree of purpose and ability to do something to people. The Freedom of Information Act was something that came as a result of so many people in the anti-war movement being jailed without any reason, the COINTELPRO program that you just mentioned. And then when Reagan became president, he did away with it to a major degree, and now there's even more of this. And what that really means is that if you're a historian, if you're an author, if you're a talk show host, if you're any of these things, and you want to really find information, it's all just didacted on people, and you can't find out anything. I'm doing this book on I.F. Stone, and there are 1,200 FBI pages on him. And you go into them, and they're all blacked out, and you have to fight, and you have to threaten to sue the FBI, and you finally get it. It's interesting that the government can keep you from things, but you are this individual who can be examined at any single moment of your life. So I just think we have to be very, very, very concerned. We keep talking as if the Patriot Act is going to stop terrorism. And I really, where is the indication that it has or will? It's been in the books for 2 years. As I said very early on, this investigation by the government is showing that the books were cooked and that these people that they said were terrorists were not. So I'm just questioning the validity of this in any form that can be helpful. I think it's totally different to have security at an airport. I agree with everybody who said something about that. It's what we will just have to live with for the rest of our lives. But all of this murky-lurky, let's find your neighbor, let's do this, let's do that, I really question the validity of that.
Any other comments?
Real quick, I don't know if it works or not. I just know there hasn't been another terrorist attack. Now, that doesn't mean it works, but, there just hasn't been. But that's not a strong argument to say that it works.
Well, anyway, I'd like to go back and maybe, since the commission is going to hold a meeting after we're done, whether they might take up the notion of the degree to which the city government should cooperate with the Patriot Act or refuse to, which has happened in cities from one end of the country to the other. I just offer that.
I'm sure that'll be a
Gracious
topic
enough
of
to invite me to
discussion.
come here, I
If
can
not
make a
tonight, at
suggestion.
another time, I'm sure we'll get around to discussing that issue. Alan?
Two comments, one about Senator Edwards' suggestion to be a neighborhood terrorist watch organized. Reminds me historically that before World War I, there was an organization whose name I've forgotten, but the idea was of Junior Protection League, where high school students were encouraged to turn in people with German-sounding names. I had thought since World War I we had advanced, quote, as a civilization, that we did not want to turn people in or comment on people because of suspicion without having some evidence that they really were involved in something. It's just too loose. I also take issue with Mr. Gilbert when he says it happens every day in this country that people are wrongly jailed, etc. In my mind, that doesn't make it right. If you have a constitution which sets down specific protections of people, and that's historically why it was written into the Constitution, then you should observe it.
Real quick, I didn't say it made it right. I just said it goes on, and it happens. The two wrongs never make it right.
Yeah, but there's also a speedy trial rule. Nobody sits in jail for 2 years awaiting trial because assuming they have counsel, they'll either be charged or get out in, 4 months, in 120 days.
Once you waive time, you can sit there for a long time. Robert Blake's been in there 11 months. He just started his preliminary hearing.
Well,
Some actor.
some counsel
Once you
didn't
waive
raise the
time,
speedy
all
trial.
bets are off.
But anyway, I have a different tack to take based on your comment about Saudi Arabia being the major enemy. And a fairly simple answer to that, which we could accomplish in 3 or 4 or 5 years, and that is take the NASA budget, for example, and put it to work making a hydrogen engine and changing the cars, and don't buy any gas and don't buy any oil, and they're through. They can take a bath in their oil, and that's probably what they deserve. But I mean, there are solutions out there if you think big enough in terms of what to do. And he can forget about Iraq sitting on all that oil. They'll sit on it for a lot longer. And that's a much simpler way of dealing with terrorism. And my presumption is if the president wasn't in the oil business, that we might go a little bit further on this attack.
I think I wanted to ask you that too. You know, we have made the strange bedfellows allies for the need of oil for so long. And how do you think we can solve the problem of if you really feel that you know more than I do about this area, Saudi Arabia as being the loose cannon of all our terrorist concerns? How do we free ourselves from this kind of dependence? Right now, we're going off to fight Iraq, and Saudi Arabia is supposedly an ally. So,
Well, I don't think Saudi Arabia is an ally. I think not buying oil from Saudi Arabia. First of all, I think it's very complicated. I don't think we can get out of the oil business anytime soon. So I think we're tied to Saudi Arabia for some time. But I think we're making moves to reduce our dependency on oil. I certainly do. And then Saudi Arabia will be left with that. We're their biggest customer. However, I think that would only exacerbate the problem. I don't think it would go away. I think terrorism would increase because the Saudi government is also the religious government. The Wahhabis and the Saudis are hooked together tightly. And so I don't know but what the religious side of that union, that bizarre union, would take over. But with respect to Saudi Arabia, and I gave a talk on this not too long ago, Saudi Arabia has very serious problems inside of Saudi Arabia. The people often refer to the royal Saudis as the airport Wahhabis because they live like anything but religious Muslims when they leave Saudi Arabia. And their wealth is it's beyond ostentatious. It's corrupt. The display of wealth can't be imagined. The income in Saudi Arabia is the average income is between per capita income is between $8,000 and $10,000 a year for Saudi Arabians. So it's a poor country, but they have a very, very and 99% of the wealth in Saudi Arabia is controlled by 1% of the people, the royal family, and they live very, very well. They depend on a great deal of foreign workers. What we could do is perhaps push the people who send foreign workers into Saudi Arabia, Romania, Korea, no, not Turkey, no, not Jordan. They all send it in, but there are 3 countries that send the workers in. Nothing would get done in Saudi Arabia if we could, it's not India. It's surprising when you hear who the countries are. I'm sorry I can't put my hands on this right away. It's Romania, Korea.
I think it's the Philippines.
Not the Philippines. but many Filipinos work there. India is very dependent on Saudi money. The New York Times had an article recently about the Indians who are no longer working in Saudi. Well, I hate to hold you up while I look for this, because I can't.
Okay, while you're
Find the
looking,
workers.
let me ask another,
But Saudi Arabia, I feel, is this very serious enemy long-term, and there's a religious, almost jihad against the United States that won't go away anytime soon. It's a serious problem.
if you'd like to bring it up, you can look for it. Let me throw out another topic on the table and get the panelists a feeling about it. And I found this interesting as an explanation what the government is doing. And this has to do with the government's intrusion into lawyer-client confidentiality. John Ashcroft's deputies have gone on record as stating that the administration is talking about policy during a specific time of war and not permanently altering American jurisprudence. The administration argues that secrecy is a psychological weapon, and the lawyer consultation interferes with efforts to gather intelligence information because it interferes with the government interrogators' ability to foster psychological dependency in the captive, which would make them more willing to cooperate and provide data. Your comments on this?
First of all, there is a law which allows the government to monitor the conversations between a lawyer and a defendant, provided that the issue is one of transferring of information dealing with a intelligence question. And there is a case pending in the courts in New York of a lawyer who's been arrested for doing just that in talking with the client. But here we're talking about the question of having prison officials authorize, again without the statute, just by administrative directive, of interference with what is one of the most fundamental issues of due process in the Constitution. You cannot have a fair trial unless a defendant feels free to discuss anything he wishes to discuss with a lawyer, so the lawyer can investigate further into the charges against him. There has to be a trust and a candor between attorney and client, and it cannot exist if the attorney feels that his comments are being overheard. Again, I say, if the government feels that the attorney is about to discuss something with someone being held in jail, dealing with an intelligence question, they have some evidence of that, they can bring a prosecution. But this is too open-ended, which would allow interference with what is an elementary due process right.
Again, coming from a family of lawyers, this is troubling, but it depends who's listening and what they're doing with the information. If the prison officials are listening and then taking the information to the prosecutor, we got a real problem here. But if an independent third party is listening and listens to the conversation and then does not breach the attorney-client privilege by taking it to a prosecutor or somebody else who can do the client harm, then I think that's an entirely different situation. I don't know if that's spelled out in the Patriot Act. It's just too vast to cover every aspect of it in the time that we were notified of this. But if, that's a huge if, because I don't know, if it's an independent third party and they're not giving that privileged information to somebody who can do them harm, then I think under those circumstances, people could live with it.
One of the great dangers about having the government overhear a conversation or engage in collection of information of any kind is the possible abuse that it could be put to. I don't necessarily think there is a, quote, independent third party who will just keep the information in the file someplace. Once the information is out, it's open to possible misuse. We've had numerous examples of that. Indeed, one of the reasons for the adoption of the Freedom of Information Act was precisely to look into the abuses that government was doing, and the disclosure of it was necessary for the public to understand how government was operating. Therefore, to assume, as was said here before, that the government already has a lot of information about us and credit cards, etc., makes me worry about giving up my privacy and my information into the hands of a government agent. I don't necessarily think that every government employee is necessarily going to misuse the information, but there's a great danger that there will be. Blackmail, extortion, based on the use of government information is part of the public record. And I don't think that should be done.
This is just an aside, small story on this, but when they did study with the Freedom of Information Act, they studied what was going on with the anti-war movement. They ended up having accounted for every sixth person who was marching. The final figures were that every sixth person who was in the anti-war movement in Chicago against the in the 1968 convention was an FBI agent who had infiltrated, and we heard of all of that in the civil rights movement continuously, of infiltrating, fomenting some of the more negative aspects of civil disobedience. And so, again, that's just one more story that points out that we have to be very careful about that.
Okay, let's give everybody an opportunity to sum up their position for this evening. Who would like to go first?
First, I would like to set the record straight. Saudi Arabia has 4 million workers go to Saudi Arabia every day, and the three countries that send the most workers there are Korea, Pakistan, and Romania. And they do all the real work in the kingdom. So they drive the taxis, they clean the streets, they collect the trash, they work in the hotels, so that straightens that out. I think a certain amount, I'm certainly concerned with all the points that were brought up about the loss of civil liberties or civil rights in this country. But I think a certain amount of leeway or generalization is needed to predict how potentially hostile some forces might behave. I think our law enforcement agencies have to have some flexibility in apprehension, and sometimes it has to be done earlier than we would like it done. I'm hoping the system will be structured in such a manner that people who are held unjustly will be let go. I would be more concerned when we talk about libraries, and I have a sister who's a librarian. She's the head of a big library, and I myself have always been involved in research work and using libraries. I would be far more concerned. I don't care if people know what I buy or what I look into or what I search on the internet, and I search some things that might be rather bizarre, but if someone came to me to ask me some questions, I would hope my background would justify my using that kind of material. If not, if I got caught up in something that was not of my own making and I got in trouble, well, that happens. It's unfortunate. It happens. But I would trust that the system would kick out the ones who aren't really a danger. I have no history of being a danger to anyone, certainly not the United States of America. I would be far more worried if the books weren't there in the bookstore. If we had something that said these books can't be used, the library can't have these books, the bookstore can't sell these books. If we got into any kind of book burning, then I would be hysterical. But just having a record kept of what I buy, it doesn't threaten me that much. I'm far more threatened by the people who've announced they're going to destroy us. I think terrorism, money laundering, industrial espionage are all going to involve new forms of conventional warfare. It's a new type of war. And these things are going to provide the terrorist leaders and cells with means to wage a war without them ever having to acknowledge they're waging a war. I don't see peace as the absence of war. I think the United States has been at the mercy of terrorists for almost 30 years. I think now we're just starting to address it because of what happened in New York City. Diplomats can't always settle international disputes if there's good faith and willingness to come to an agreement. In a revolutionary situation, each power sees its opponent as not acting in good faith, not willing to agree. And I basically think coalitions against revolutions usually occur only after many, many betrayals. You can't know ahead of time how amenable to reason your opponent is. You know his reasonableness only after he acts, and then your system and your coalition is already destroyed.
One clear up before I sum up. Somebody said Bush is in the oil business. I hear that every day. That really irritates me. Bush is in the oil business like Clinton was land developer at Whitewater. That's rhetoric. Bush was in the oil business many, many years ago. The president made a vast majority of his fortune selling some baseball team. And that's where his money comes from. And I don't even think he did that well in the oil business when he was in it 20 years ago. We all own stock in oil companies, and we are oil dependent, and nobody's showing any inclination of changing soon, and that's the citizens. I don't mind the government taking a look at me, because I'm not doing anything wrong. However, we have the presumption of innocence. It shouldn't have to be that way, but it is. And we can bury our head in the sand and say these guys aren't horrible guys, and they or them or whoever it is. We are going to have to do like we've had for decades, go and get these bad governments like Saudi Arabia out and let democratically elected ones in. And you can abuse that too. And there's many issues here, but our survival is at stake. This is no longer like World War I and World War II, where it was fought thousands of miles ago, or Korea or Vietnam or Grenada. These are on our shores now. And we cannot overlook at all that a pretty well split Congress passed this real fast and overwhelmingly. We can't overlook that. There are representatives. The system worked. Congress passes bad laws all the time, and it's going to be their job to fix it if it is a bad law, like they did with Prohibition and many other bad laws. Freedom of Information Act, I heard. Well, that's really good. It's a wonderful thing unless the government really doesn't want you to see it, and then you don't get it. You get not only redacted, but they'll say, no, you can't have it, national security. You get what they want you to have. Or they don't care anymore because it's been so long ago, or somebody wasn't paying attention and sent something out they shouldn't have. We have to now understand this is not our traditional war where we're fighting for territory, or we're fighting to save the Jews and the millions of others, or responding. This enemy is throughout the world, and they want us dead. They don't want our land. They don't want to take over. Somebody else said they don't want to take over our form of government. They either want us to convert or kill us. No in between with them. And I sure am glad I'm not in the Congress right now. These are tough calls. They're tough issues. And no matter how they vote, people are going to be mad at them. This is a tough time to be an elected official. Usually it's a pretty cool gig. But right now it's a tough time because they're making decisions that affect people's freedom, people's rights. You know, somebody gets labeled a terrorist, this is going to be like McCarthyism. It won't be 40 years before they get rid of that label. And it could be false, like most of the people who were blacklisted, they were false. We got real issues here. And to glibly say, and I'm not suggesting anybody here does, but I'm referring more to commentators and political people, that this is, oh, no big deal. This is a big deal. This is the biggest of deals. And we got to be on them. More, at no time ever were we more responsible to watch our elected officials and to watch our government. And we got to do it. And what's going on now by saying anybody who disagrees with this isn't patriotic, that should be an affront to all of us. Democrat, liberal, Republican, doesn't matter. Everybody in America has the right to dissent. Everybody. But people who are dissenting now are getting the McCarthyism treatment, and that's wrong. You want to go change something, you go to Washington, or you get new officials in there. Throw the bums out. But we can't do anything without going through the system, and we can't do nothing, or we're dead.
In answer to the basic question that was raised about security and freedom, I don't think it's a question of either or. I think you can have both. I think that the Patriot Act and other steps taken by the administration, the Attorney General, has not increased our security necessarily. As I said before, good police work has resulted in the arrest of many people throughout the world who were physically threatening to bomb and to kill and to maim. And I don't disagree that we are engaged in a war of survival. But I believe that good law enforcement, more money given for analysis of intelligence, more money given for new techniques of law enforcement is necessary. But I don't believe that the ends, the good ends that you talk about, can be accomplished by adopting bad means. We are not living in a world which we are simply isolated. We are together with other people, but we are also defending something, in the words of President Bush, freedom, and I think that freedom includes those specific constitutional guarantees, and I think you can have those guarantees. You can enjoy free speech. You can enjoy free association without necessarily the government using its heavy hand and power, because remember, the government has tremendous power, without the government doing that. And I think that by adopting a clear view of what the Act does and by protesting these things that are wrong, we are acting in the most American way. I don't agree with the Attorney General who said when he testified before Congress that those people who are worried about loss of liberties are giving aid to the enemy. Or as Ari Fleischer said the day of 9/11, Americans should be careful what they say. I don't believe you have to give up those guarantees in order to defeat an enemy which is different and new and tremendous. And I would urge the Commission and others to remember what we're really about. We are Americans defending a Constitution adopted with specific guarantees to people, and we can't give that up.
I would take that a bit further and say that those freedoms that are guaranteed arose out of conditions that our forefathers saw as very bad and terrible, and it's what they were getting away from with Star Chamber, which is exactly what happens when you hold people in prison without any opportunity to get out, or when you have trials in secret, so you don't know exactly what's been said, or with a military tribunal, so that you really have to understand the history of why we're here and why we're defending that liberty. And the second thing is that there isn't any evidence that I have ever seen that all of these draconian laws have resulted in any increase in our security. They say they have stopped 10 terrorist attacks or 100 terrorist attacks, never said what they are, never said who they're holding. You know, I remember a great story in a Damon Runyon short story where the gambler comes in with his last $20 and he bets against the dice, which the very tall guy is throwing in a hat. And he tells him that he made the point, made the 10, which means he lost it. And as he's walking out the door, he turns around and says, "Louis, are you making it the hard way?" He had no way to see what exactly had happened. And that's the kind of situation that you have now. They say, well, he can make all these kind of claims. Ashcroft's pretty good at that sort of thing. We did this, we did that, we did the other, we stopped this, we stopped that, but we don't know what they are. And here's the Government Accounting Office saying that he cooked the books and said that they had 3 times as many things that they had. And I understand that particular maneuver because I was appropriations chairman for 5 years, and every agency tries to make their workload look like it's so much that they got to have all this extra money. And that's essentially the old game of saying, well, we've got all these cases going, but we can't tell you about them, but we need 25 more lawyers or 500 more lawyers or whatever everybody's asking for. So I think that we really have to adopt a rational view of what's happening and see that really we're being asked to give away liberty without any benefit. And an aside Mr. Gilbert, George Bush made a fortune out of millions of dollars in the Harkin Company, and he managed to sell the stock a month before it went baflooey. And the Securities and Exchange Commission called off the investigation, I guess when they saw the election returns. When you say, well, everybody's in the oil business, there's a company called Desser Industries, which was the major oil drillers. They were the ones that invented the diamond bit for digging oil wells. You know who started Desser Industries? George, the president's grandfather, who was the senator from Connecticut, Prescott Bush, when he was investment banker. And you know who bought out Desser in the last year or two? An outfit called Halliburton, which may be familiar to you because that was what Dick Cheney was running. And now Halliburton is in big trouble because Desser passed along a fantastic amount of asbestos liability, which they, I guess, never bothered to tell them about at the beginning. So
Myra,
don't tell me that they're out of the oil business or that they don't know anything about the oil business. They've been in it for three generations.
We have about 3 minutes of air time left, Myra.
I always let my wife have the last word.
Oh, was that a setup? I'll make it very brief, but it was that great English writer, Boswell, who said that patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. And to take the phrase, the U.S. Patriot Act, and wrap it up with red, white, and blue patriotism, does not disguise its many flaws. And I just think that that's the message I want to leave with you. And the argument that they had an overwhelming majority of people voting for it, we have to remember that it was a rush to judgment right after 9/11. I don't think anybody was thinking about it. I don't think there are very many people who even understand what the Patriot Act is about, including many on the Hill are just sort of admitting it privately now. I've talked to some of them, and they really never examined it. And, you know, I just want to reiterate that it is now legal for government agents to break into your home when you are away, conduct a search, and keep you from finding out for days, weeks, and even months that a warrant was ever issued. Now, the argument that, well, you would never get a warrant unless you were guilty, I mean, this is not a country where you're innocent until proven guilty, and to be suddenly considered guilty because the government is looking into your life, the guilt by association is a terribly wrong way to be going around any of this. And I know that I'm reiterating what Alan and Jack have said. And we have to stop this knee-jerk concept that this is a necessity. And we must, I think, work with so many of these people, librarians, publishers, journalists, communities, who are opening people's eyes to this side of the Patriot Act. It's not an either-or, but these things should be changed. Thank you.
And thank you. And we're going to be cut off the air any moment now. And I do want to give the commissioners an opportunity to comment and ask questions. But before we do that, I do want to thank the panel for a stimulating and intellectually challenging forum that you presented to us. You touched on some very profound topics of great importance to us, and we as citizens of Palm Springs are very appreciative of giving up your time this evening and coming here to do that. Commissioners, any comments, questions? Paul?
Well, I have a question. Mr. Reitman mentioned about that we should use intelligence police work in order to catch those criminals. I think that was the intent of the Patriot Act to give a better tool for the intelligence workers like CIA, FBI. Do you think there is a contradiction of what you're saying, that we should use intelligence and yet we shouldn't give the intelligence agency a way they could research those things?
I don't think the intelligence agency should be adopting procedures which I think are unconstitutional. I think those things which disallow a warrant, which makes government accountable for their actions, I don't think things which are done in total secrecy in that way is correct. My point was that police agencies and intelligence agencies do have contacts with people. Sometimes they place informants inside the organization so they know what's going on. I have no objection to that, so long as they're not simply probing the political beliefs and ideas. There are plenty of people who give tips. Every day I read in the paper, and I disagree with my good friend Jack. I think there have been examples where things have happened around the world where threats have been thwarted because of good police work. But tips were given, police followed up, they investigated, and they found out. They didn't do this by going into libraries or by asking people their political views and ideas when they detained them. They did it by hard gumshoe work, and that's the distinction that I draw.
Okay, I'm going to sign off this evening. I got the 1-minute signal. Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to this evening's forum, and we will continue questions. You're invited to stay. If you have to leave, that's fine too. But we will continue because we do have a business meeting following this. So, ladies and gentlemen, good night.